Okay, I got a couple of questions over the weekend, et cetera, and some things happened, and I didn't have any planned handouts or anything for today. I'll tell you where you can find the information I'm talking about as I go through. But I got a call this morning, an interesting call, so I just want to discuss that first. And that's disclosure of a known material adverse fact to the physical structure and the property. You know, our statute says that if the agent knows of any known material fact about the physical structure of the property, they have to disclose to the buyer in writing. Doesn't, my interpretation, it does not have to be an addendum, but something has to be in writing. So the situation, they already had their home inspection. They sent it over and said everything was fine, but the seller didn't like the smoke smell every time they used the fireplace, so they called somebody to clean it. And when they came out to clean it, they decided, or they found that the flue liners were cracked, and they recommended that the fireplace not be used, that it's a fire hazard, and that it would cost X amount of dollars to fix it. So the question is, since they already had a home inspector show that there wasn't a problem, is this something that has to be disclosed? And yes, all the way up to settlement. If you have an offer and you know the no material adverse fact, and the fact that the flue liner is cracked and could burn the house down, I think is a pretty material fact about the physical structure. But the other question was, what if we just go ahead and get it fixed? Do we have to tell them? Since you're under contract and the law says any no material adverse fact, I would disclose it to them, and say that we have signed a contract for the repair to be done, and it'll be done before settlement, but also make sure that the contractor can do that. Contractors are kind of busy right now. I've had to wait 2.5 months just to get my driveway paved. I signed a contract 2.5 months ago for sometime in September, just because they're all busy, because now people are staying home, they're finding things wrong with their house and they're getting them fixed. So yes, you do have to disclose it, in my opinion, in writing, get it fixed. Now, if that contract died for some reason, and now this has been fixed by a licensed bonded contractor with a report that it's no longer a problem, then to the next purchaser, then there would be nothing to disclose because it has been remedied. Okay? Any questions about the disclosure of material facts about the physical structure of the property for you as an agent? Now, the seller only has the 5 disclosures that have to be made, but you as an agent, our statute requires you to disclose. Okay? So please don't try to hide anything about a property because the seller wants you to. You're just asking for a bigger problem down the road. Okay? Now, Wednesday session, we ended up with something about commission being a net commission, etc. I want to readdress that issue. When I talked to the managing broker, etc., later, I was under the impression this was a for sale by owner, but the property was listed in Bright. If the property is listed in Bright, it is not a for sale by owner. Okay? There is a listing agreement signed on that property. Okay, so it's definitely not a FSBO even if it's for informational purposes only, and it said deal directly with the owner on all contracts and whatever. That you can put that type of a listing into the system, but it is a listing. So if you have this situation where somebody wants to put a listing into the system, if you go to the Virginia Association of Realtors website okay? Virginia Association of Realtor website. And you log in as a realtor, which you can do. You need your NERDS number and you capitalize your last name. That is how you log in. You can go to contract forms. VAR has some forms that NVAR would not have. So Form 410 is called Virginia Realtors Exclusive Authorization to Sell Limited Service Representation. And remember, in our law, you can be a standard agent or you can be a limited service agent if you're going to be the agent for a seller, okay? So, let me find my form here. So, with the limited service representation form, it's a listing agreement, but it allows you to remove some of the duties that you would be handling. So I'll just read what it has here for you. Broker will not conduct marketing activities on behalf of the, except this paragraph 7B. Broker will not assist in drafting and negotiating offers and counteroffers, contracts or amendments and addendas, or establishing a strategy to accomplish owner's objectives. Broker will not receive or present offers, counteroffers, notices, or broker will not assist the owner in satisfying owner's contract obligations. So if you're going to just stick a listing into the system and say deal directly with the owner, you should be using a listing agreement still. VAR has one for this purpose. You would check each box that you are removing from a standard duty. And when you entered into MLS, the Bright system, there is a field that you have to check that says this is a limited service representation agreement. Okay. So if you're going to take a listing where you're not going to do all the duties, but some of them, you can certainly do that. Use the appropriate form. NVAR only gives us standard agency forms. Okay. You also need to run that one past your managing broker so that they also agree to that. Now, there's another way that you could enter it in for entering only for the purposes of putting it in MLS. You would use Virginia Realtors Residential Listing Agreement Non-Agency Independent Contractor Relationship Form. That was Form 420. And that is where it says, I'm not your agent and I'm not going to do all these things. So you have to use one of the appropriate forms to take a listing to enter it that way. But any way that's entered into the system, it is not a FSBO at that point, okay? So the conversation that I was getting a little testy about last week was the language that it was a net listing type situation. So net listings in Virginia is one where the seller says, you get me this much money, you keep the rest, okay? That is against the law in the state of Virginia. If you look at DPOR regulations, you can download DPOR regulations, 18 VAC, Virginia Administrative Code, 13520-280 deals with improper brokerage commissions. So making a listing contract which provides for a net return to the seller, leaving the licensee free to sell the property at any price he can obtain in excess of the net price named by the seller. That is illegal in the state of Virginia. It's also for leasing. If I tell you I want $2,000 a month, you keep what you get above, that is also illegal in the state of Virginia. Also, Bright does not accept, they will not accept net listings or open listings, okay? Bright also has rules about entering in these independent contract listings and these limited service listings. I would refer you to go to Bright, log into Bright, and read their rules and regulations. One of these sessions, I want to cover a few things they have in here about IDX, Internet Data Exchange, and properly putting listings in, etc. Okay. Now, the question really that was trying to be addressed last week was not a net listing. It was a commission based on a net sales price. There's a difference, okay? Actually, the only type of listing that could be entered into Bright for a net would be builder that will only pay on the net based price, the commission. You have to understand, you enter a listing into the Bright system, you as an agent have guaranteed the commission to the other side. Now, the situation arose where the buyer and the seller agreed that the commission would only be based on the net sales price, and it was a FSBO form. Well, there's a couple things wrong with that. It was not a FSBO at that point. And second of all, the total commission and commission splits are an agreement between brokers and their clients. If it was okay for buyer and seller to make an agreement about the commission, why in the world wouldn't they just draw up an agreement that says the agents get nothing and we'll just keep it all? Okay, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so when you talk about net sales price, you have to figure out exactly what the other side is talking about. So if you are a broker and the seller doesn't like the contract and says, well, I'll take this contract, but hey, I'm not going to pay commission on money that I have to give back to their buyer, determine what that is. Because when you say net, different people can interpret that differently. So to real estate agents, net sales price means gross sales price less seller concessions, okay? And that's why when you look at the sales contract in paragraph 2, they'd say, they have right there the seller concessions, and they have the word less, so that everybody knows what the net sales price is, okay? But they might also, the seller might also feel like, hey, I shouldn't be paying commission on commissions. That could also be interpreted to be net. So you have to spell it out. Or does the buyer and seller consider net to be my walkaway? Because to me, if I'm a member of the public, my net is how much money I get from the settlement. So that might be after I pay my mortgage, etc. So it has to be spelled out. Everybody understand. As a broker, if your seller is coming back and asking for net, then it's broker to broker, not buyer to seller. So you would get back to the other broker. They would have to agree in writing to accept the lower figure based on net. Okay. Now, in this instance, the seller's attorney drafted up something as a FSBO document. Well, it really has no bearings at this point on the listing agent and the buyer's agent, because they had a listing agreement. The seller had a listing agreement that agreed to pay their person this much money, and the buyer's agent, if you got your buyer agency agreement signed, the buyers have agreed to pay this much money, and it's not determined by buyers and sellers. So if once they signed that agreement, okay, that buyer and seller signed that agreement, then each one of them are saying, I'm going to deal with my own agent and work this out. Because by the buyer agreeing to what the seller wanted, they've basically said, I'll pay my buyer's agent because my agreement's, because if third party is credited towards my obligation to pay my agent X amount of dollars. Okay, So it doesn't control literally doesn't control the agents in that situation.
Larry,
Yes,
sometimes we see
I can't hear you.
Sometimes we see it, hold on, please.
You need to speak up louder. I can't hear you.
Sometimes we see it in a listing and how we could treat that as a buyer agent.
Okay, so if you see it in a listing agreement, it says commission based on net. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Then discuss it. You could discuss it with your buyer client, saying, you know, you've agreed to pay X amount of dollars, so this means this much is coming in. You owe us the difference. Or most agents are just going to do what?
put it in an offer.
Most agents are just going to take the money. You can't put anything in the offer asking the other broker to give you anything additional. You understand that, right? 1616 of our code of ethics. Now, the buyer could always ask the seller for credit to pay their their agent's commission. There's nothing to prevent a buyer and seller from negotiating in the contract for credit for the seller to give the buyer money to pay their agent. But you can't ask the other agent. So you couldn't put anything in there saying, this contract is contingent upon the listing agent giving the broker more commission or not taking the commission because you're not taking it. That's a direct violation of Article 16 of our Code of Ethics. You don't want to get involved in that. But
can you call them and tell them that I'm at the 3% from my buyer, and you ask the seller pay the full commission?
Well, you can't, but the buyer technically could put in their contract that is contingent upon a credit of X percent, for the, other side to pay it. Probably be rejected, but technically there's nothing to prevent a buyer and seller from negotiating that in their contract. You can't be the one technically adding it in there. The buyer would actually have to add it.
Thank you.
Okay, so just be careful with it. Find out what net is. And also our Code of Ethics, 3-2 of our Code of Ethics says that the listing agent cannot unilaterally change the offer of compensation after a contract is presented. So that, remember that first blank in our contract says offer date. Once that date is filled in and that offer is submitted to the other side, so the broker can't come back and say, well, you have to take less commission, because of this. It takes a negotiation between listing broker and buyer's agent broker to make that change. It cannot be unilateral. So when this addendum came back, okay, in this particular situation where buyer and seller agreed the commission would be based on the net sales price, that was not a negotiation between the two brokers. So technically the broker that had the listing in the computer system, right, could have been held liable. Now what MRIS or Bright or whatever you want to call its rules say, you need to disclose all that in the remarks section. So if it's disclosed up front, okay, then you know in advance. You could always, as the buyer's agent, call the listing agent and see if they're willing in advance to pay the additional money, okay? Or at least gives you a chance to discuss with your buyer client that they might be liable for a little bit more money, okay, if they want to buy that property. Okay? Now, the next thing I want to talk about, earnest money deposits, okay? DPOR is very strict about earnest money deposits. It's their hot point. I know we've talked about this before, but I want to cover it one more time. Paragraph 3 of our sales contract. So if you pull out paragraph 3 of the sales contract, I want to take a I want to refer to that. Okay. So it'd be page 1 of your sales contract if you have that. Buyer's deposit in the amount of, and you check that box, check bank wired funds and or a note due and payable shall be held by escrow agent. Okay. Now, escrow agent is whoever is going to hold that check. So if it's Fairfax Realty of Tyson's, then that would be put in there. But if it's a title company, there's different rules for title companies. Our rules for DPOR, if it's a real estate company holding the check, 5 business banking days. Okay, 5 business banking days. If it's going to be a title company, that's different rules, right? So VAR has another form. It's 600B, and it's called Earnest Money Deposit Confirmation Form. I would suggest that you start using this confirmation form if the check is going to be held by anybody other than your company, because it says seller's name, purchaser's name, property address, contract date, earnest money deposit amount, escrow agent, their address, the contact information, and it says the earnest money deposit listed above was received on whatever date by the escrow agent, and have the title company sign that and date it. Okay. That way you have in your file that the money has been delivered, because in this contract it says the buyer has delivered or will deliver, right? Okay, so it's the buyer that has to deliver it. We need some kind of acknowledgement that it's been received. Technically, I guess you could use this even if it's being held by Fairfax Realty of Tyson's, for instance, as the escrow agent. And the form actually says to be used in lieu of a copy of the check. It's very dangerous. One of the things that I find happening quite often is that when agents write a contract, they'll make a copy of the buyer's check, and they will attach that buyer's check to the sales contract and send it over an unsecure email system to the other side. And when you do that, on that check, you have the seller's name, address, their routing number, their checking account number, their signature, everything that anybody needs who can intercept that email, everything they need to clean out the account of the purchaser. So be careful, redact that information. When I say redact, not on the check itself, make a copy of the check. You blank out the signature, you blank out the routing number, the checking account number, etc., and send that over. So this form that VAR developed should be acceptable to the other side if the escrow agent has already acknowledged that they have the money and the date received. Okay, so it can be used in a couple ways. If it says the escrow agent, the buyer has delivered the deposit, then you can have the form signed. Or if they will deliver the deposit to the escrow agent in X number of days after date of ratification, rather than having to have a copy of the check, you have a form signed by the escrow agent and dated when they actually receive the money. So good form to use, I think. It's a VAR form, not an NVAR form. Okay, I'm going to actually recommend to VAR that they come up, NVAR, they come up with some type of form along those lines. Now, where DPOR jumps in on this, okay? Their statute has things called prohibited acts, okay? And this is once again 18 VAC 135-2260. If you just do 18 VAC 135, you will have all the DPOR regs if you want them. But actions constituting failing to act in such a manner as to safeguard the interest of the public. And that's what DPOR tells you their job is to safeguard the interest of the public. So an example of that, a licensee knowingly providing the broker with an earnest money deposit check from an account with insufficient funds, okay? If you know that the funds are not there, then you can't say you have received a check. So an instance of that would be, I tell you I have to make some arrangements, I have to move some things around, okay? Then you should be telling me, when can you have those things moved around? Well, it'll take me a week. Well, then you should put that you have not received the escrow check, but you will receive the check X number of days after date of ratification, or actually write that language in your contract so all parties know that the money is not there, that it will be delivered in X amount of days afterwards, okay? But they're considering that failing to safeguard the interest of the public, okay? So don't turn a check in unless the funds are there. You would check the box, will deliver to the escrow agent X number of days after date of ratification. They also go on to say in DPOR regulations 4A12, actions constituting engaging in improper, fraudulent, or dishonest conduct. And the first one is licensees submitting copies of the same earnest money deposit check for inclusion with multiple offers. And it's multiple offers. So if I am writing a contract on 3 different properties in one day to put out there to see if I get one of them, and I give you one check for $10,000, you can't make a copy of that check and attach it to each offer. You would have to have a separate check. And if I didn't have that much money in my bank account, then we go back to submitting it, without having the money in the account, right? Another example, another one they're saying is engaging in improper conduct. A licensee representing in offers he received the earnest money deposit when he is not, or he knows the check is worthless. So you're dealing with me today and I say, I didn't bring my checkbook. I'm sorry, I can't give you a check today. I'll get it to you tomorrow. And you write into the contract that you received a check and you present that offer, but you've never received a check. That is a problem, especially when the next day you call me to say, well, congratulations, you got this house. And I say, well, I changed my mind, I don't want it. Now you've got a problem because you put in there that you did have the check. So once again, your choice would be, if I didn't have a check, we'll deliver the deposit check to the agent by X number of days after date of ratification. The next one is a licensee misrepresenting who is holding the check. If the check is made out to RTS title and you're holding it, that's a misrepresentation, okay? Unless you actually work for RTS title, the choice in the contract would be, we'll deliver the deposit to the escrow agent X number of days after date of ratification because you are not RTS title. Now, the best way around most of these is to take a note, okay? And it does allow for the party to give a note, okay? A promissory note. And it says, or a note due and payable on. So if I didn't have my checkbook, rather than taking a chance when I'll bring the check back, you could get a note, okay? Due and payable on X day in the future. The problem is most listing agents would freak out if there was a note involved, okay? For some reason, they think there has to be a check for an earnest money deposit. Technically, in the state of Virginia, earnest money deposit is not required. It just shows your good faith that you intend to go through with this, okay? So if I give a note, that is perfectly fine. Actually, if I was the purchaser, okay, if I were the purchaser and I was going to have a home inspection, why would I give you a check for $10,000 that if I don't like my home inspection, the seller has to agree to release it before I could use that $10,000 to buy another property? So I might say, here's a check for $100 and I'll give you a note for $9,900. So paragraph 3 would read, gave you a check for $100, a check for $9,900, due and payable within 3 days of the removal of my home inspection contingency. That way, if you want to hold my $100 up, I still have my $9,900 to go out and buy another property. Because remember, I can't use the same earnest money deposit check with multiple offers. And once that money's in a broker's escrow account, it belongs to both parties, buyer and seller. And the broker can't let that money out of that account until they have that release signed by all parties. And if that seller's upset and delays, I can't go out and buy another property. Now, if you received a contract on your listing like this, what do you guys think? Would you be okay with that $100 plus $9,900 note? Anybody? What do you think? You can unmute yourself and tell us. Well, I answer for you. Most of you are going to say what? No, right? Because you're not used to that. And we're in a good market, right? I'm starting to see signs of a little bit of a slowdown, but in a good market, you're probably not going to do it. But what if you've had this listing for 9 months? You've only had 2 showings, and this is the first offer. And now it comes in with a $100 check and a $9,900 note. What do you think about that contract now?
Hey, Larry, I'll be okay with that.
I would too,
Because
especially.
I had a listing one time, and the seller was upset because when he canceled out, the buyer wouldn't release his money. They kept it for an entire year.
Yeah, I mean, and it could happen. So the money's all tied up. And another reason I like a note, can I stop payment on a note?
Yes.
No, I can't stop payment on a note. I can't stop payment on a, can I stop payment on a check? Sure. Can a check bounce? Sure. So, I'm not sure why we're so sold. Just it has to be a check, but most agents only know one way of doing things, and that's the way they do it. But I like a note because I can go to court and enforce that note, okay? Get a judgment. If check bounces or if it's a bad check, who do I have to go to? Probably the police department, right? So I'm not that against notes myself. And VAR does have on their site a note. Okay. They also have a form for selling a personal property that shouldn't be in a contract. Okay, and an addendum form. So maybe we'll take a look at some of the VAR forms that are not in VAR in 2 weeks when we do this again. We're not meeting next Monday because of the holiday. Okay. Any questions about any of that stuff we covered today?
I would like to know the VR listing representing limited services number. What is the form number? I did miss.
It's a VAR form, not an NVAR. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So if you want a limited service representation, it's VAR form 410.
410. Thank you.
And if you want the one for non-agency independent contractor, which you definitely have to talk to us before you use, would be VAR form 420.
Thank you.
Okay. They also have a limited service buyer agency form, but we need to discuss that type of stuff before you try to use it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank
So
you.
check with your manager if you're going to use those type of
Okay.
listings. And I could see a real use for limited service representation, because sometimes people don't need all of our service. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?